The stars had always called to humanity, and by the year 2347, humans had answered that call with everything they had. 17 star systems now held human colonies, mining stations, and research outposts that stretched across the darkness of space like a web of light and hope. Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth defense vessel Resolute, watching the stars streak past as his ship traveled faster than light toward a distant world called Kepler 442b. He was a tall man, with gray at his temples and scars on his hands from too many battles fought in too many places. The distress signal had come 3 hours ago, a desperate cry for help from the mining colony that called Kepler 442b home. 40,000 people lived there, digging precious metals from the red soil and sending them back to fuel humanity's expansion across the cosmos. Jake had pushed his ship's engines beyond their limits to reach them in time, but deep in his gut, he knew he was already too late. The Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, and the bridge fell silent. Lieutenant Amy Cruz, the ship's xenolinguist and communications officer, made a sound that was half gasp and half sob. On the main view screen, the colony burned. Smoke rose from craters where buildings had once stood, and fires painted the night side of the planet in shades of orange and red. Ships floated in orbit, broken and twisted, their hulls torn open like they were made of paper instead of reinforced steel. Jake gripped the arms of his command chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He had seen death before, had lost friends and comrades in skirmishes with pirates, and in accidents that happened when humans pushed too far into the unknown. But this was something else entirely. This was annihilation. "Get me a count," he said, his voice steady, even though his heart was pounding. "How many survivors?" The sensor officer, a young man named Tony Blake, worked his console with shaking hands. "Sir, I am reading no life signs on the surface," he reported, and his voice cracked on the last word. "The colony is gone, all 40,000 of them." Amy Cruz wiped tears from her eyes and focused on her own console. "Commander, there is a message beacon in orbit," she said. "It is broadcasting on a frequency I have never seen before, in a language that is not in any of our databases." Jake turned to look at her. "Can you decode it?" She nodded slowly. "I can try, but it will take time." "Then get started," Jake ordered. "I want to know who did this, and why." While Amy worked through the night, Jake walked through his ship and spoke with his crew. They were scared. He could see it in their eyes. But they were also angry. Humans had come to the stars in peace, hoping to find friends among the alien species they encountered. They had found 3 so far, peaceful traders who wanted nothing more than to exchange goods and knowledge. None of them had weapons capable of this kind of destruction. None of them had any reason to attack. By morning, Amy had her answer, and she called Jake back to the bridge to hear it. The message played through the speakers, a harsh clicking sound mixed with deep rumbles that sounded like thunder rolling across mountains. Then Amy's translation program converted it to English, and every person on the bridge felt their blood run cold. "This world now belongs to the Vorath Dominion," the message declared. "The creatures that infested it have been cleansed, as is right and proper when dealing with inferior species. We claim all territory held by the beings called humans. You will surrender your worlds, your ships, and your lives to us within 30 standard cycles. Those who submit will serve. Those who resist will die. This is the will of the Vorath, and it cannot be denied." The message ended, and silence filled the bridge. Jake Morrison felt something cold settle in his chest. But it was not fear. It was rage, pure and clean and burning like a star. "Amy," he said quietly, "what do we know about these Vorath?" She pulled up everything their databases held, which was not much. "They are mentioned in the records of the Fenari traders we met last year," she explained. The Fenari called them the Conquerors, and they refused to say more. From what I can piece together, the Vorath Dominion controls over 200 star systems. They have been expanding for thousands of years, absorbing or destroying every species they encounter. Tony Blake looked up from his console with fear written across his face. 200 systems, he repeated. Commander, we have 17, and most of those are barely established. How are we supposed to fight something that big? Jake did not answer right away. Instead, he stared at the burning planet on the view screen, at the graves of 40,000 humans who had done nothing wrong except exist in a universe where something like the Vorath also existed. Then he turned to face his crew. We go home, he said. We tell Earth what happened here, and we figure out what to do next. The journey back to Earth took 4 days, and Jake spent most of that time in his quarters, thinking. Humanity had never faced anything like this. Their wars had always been against each other, brother against brother, nation against nation. They had no experience fighting an alien empire that saw them as insects to be crushed. But humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions. They had climbed out of caves and built cities that touched the clouds. They had split the atom and reached for the stars. Maybe, Jake thought, maybe that stubbornness that had carried humanity through so many disasters could carry them through this one too. When the Resolute reached Earth, Jake found that word had already spread. Other ships had encountered Vorath scouts at the edges of human space, and 2 more colonies had gone silent. Fear was spreading faster than any plague, and people were already talking about surrender. Admiral Sam Perry, commander of Earth's entire defense fleet, called an emergency meeting. Governors from every colony attended via holographic link, their faces pale and drawn. Military commanders filled the room, and Jake stood among them, still wearing the same uniform he had worn when he saw Kepler 442b burning. We have confirmed the enemy's fleet strength, Admiral Perry announced, his voice heavy. The Vorath are coming with over 10,000 warships, each one larger and more powerful than anything we possess. Our entire fleet numbers fewer than 300 vessels. Murmurs of despair rippled through the room. One governor, a woman from the Mars colony, stood up with tears in her eyes. Then we have no choice, she said. We must surrender and hope for mercy. Jake Morrison stepped forward before he even realized he was moving. There will be no mercy, he said, and everyone turned to look at him. I saw what they did to Kepler 442b. I walked through the ashes of 40,000 human beings. The Vorath do not take prisoners, they take slaves, and those they cannot use, they kill. Surrender means death, just a slower kind. Admiral Perry looked at him with tired eyes. Then what do you suggest, Commander? He asked. We cannot win a straight fight against those odds. Jake smiled, and there was no warmth in it. Then we do not fight straight, he replied. We are human beings, Admiral. We have been fighting things bigger and stronger than us since we figured out how to sharpen sticks. We survived by being smarter, by being faster, by being willing to do whatever it took to keep going. The Vorath expect us to fight like every other species they have conquered. I say we show them something new. The room went quiet, and then Admiral Perry nodded slowly. Tell me what you have in mind, he said. Jake Morrison began to speak, and as he laid out his plan, something changed in the faces of the people listening. Fear did not disappear, but it made room for something else. Hope, fragile and desperate, but real. Humanity was not going to surrender. Humanity was going to fight. 30 days was not enough time to build an army, but humanity had never been good at accepting what was possible. Every shipyard in human space ran around the clock, workers sleeping in shifts and eating at their stations. Factories that had made consumer goods converted overnight to produce weapons and armor. Schools emptied as teachers joined the war effort, and children old enough to hold tools helped in any way they could. On Mars, in a laboratory buried deep beneath the red dust, Dr. Lisa Grant worked on a problem that might save them all. She was a small woman with wild hair and circles under her eyes from too many nights without sleep. Her specialty was energy physics, and right now she was staring at a piece of alien technology recovered from the ruins of Kepler 442b. It was a power core from a Vorath weapon, and it hummed with energy that her instruments could barely measure. "The energy density is incredible," she muttered to herself. Assistant, a young man named Kevin Park. "They have found a way to compress power into a space smaller than anything we have ever achieved." Kevin nodded and ran another scan. "That is what makes their weapons so devastating," he agreed. "Our shields cannot handle the output." Lisa picked up the core and turned it over in her hands, studying its strange curves and alien symbols. Something about its design nagged at her, a flaw she could almost see but not quite grasp. Then it hit her like lightning. "The compression," she whispered. "That is their weakness." Kevin looked confused. "What do you mean?" Lisa set the core down carefully and started typing rapidly on her console. "They have compressed all this energy into a tiny space, but that means the containment field has to be perfect," she explained. "If we could disrupt that field, even for a fraction of a second, all that energy would release at once." "Like a bomb?" Kevin asked, his eyes widening. Lisa nodded grimly. "Like a very big bomb, one that would take out the ship carrying it, and probably several ships nearby. But how do we disrupt the field?" Lisa smiled for the first time in days. "That is what we're going to figure out." Meanwhile, Jake Morrison traveled to the parts of human space that polite society preferred to forget existed. The outer colonies and asteroid belts were home to pirates, smugglers, and people who had run from the law for one reason or another. These were not the kind of people who showed up at fancy meetings or followed proper military protocol. But they knew how to fight, and they knew how to survive against impossible odds. Jake found Captain Danny Vega in a bar carved into the side of an asteroid, drinking something that smelled like engine fuel, and playing cards with a group of rough-looking characters. The Smugglers, a man who had once escaped a Vorath patrol ship by flying his vessel through an asteroid field at speeds that should have torn it apart. He was missing 2 fingers on his left hand from that adventure, but he still had his life and his freedom. "Commander Morrison," Danny said without looking up from his cards, "I heard you were coming. Heard you were looking for crazy people to join a suicide mission." Jake sat down across from him and signaled the bartender for a drink. "Not a suicide mission," he corrected. "A very dangerous mission with a small chance of success. There is a difference." Danny laughed, a harsh sound that had no humor in it. "Is there?" he asked. "The Vorath have 10,000 ships, and we have 300. Those are not odds. Those are a death sentence." "They are odds that can be changed," Jake replied. "I saw what they did to Kepler 442b. 40,000 people burned to ash because we were too weak to stop it. And I am not going to let that happen to Earth, to Mars, to any of our worlds." Danny finally looked up from his cards, and Jake saw something in his eyes that surprised him. Behind the cynicism and the bravado, there was pain, real and deep. "I had family on Kepler 442b, Danny said quietly. "A sister, and her kids. They moved there 5 years ago because she wanted them to grow up somewhere with open skies." Jake felt his chest tighten. "I am sorry," he said. Danny shook his head and tossed his cards on the table. "Do not be sorry," he growled. "Just tell me how we are going to make those alien monsters pay." Jake told him about the plan, about the main fleet drawing the Vorath's attention while smaller ships hit their supply lines and communication relays. He told him about the strike team that would try to reach the enemy command ship. He told him about Dr. Grant's discovery and the weapons that might turn the Vorath's own technology against them. When he finished, Danny Vega was grinning like a wolf. "You want us to fly right into their fleet and blow ourselves up inside their ships?" he asked. "That is the craziest thing I have ever heard. I love it." Back on Earth, Amy Cruz continued her study of Vorath communications. She had intercepted dozens of transmissions over the past weeks, and slowly she was building a picture of who the Vorath were and how they thought. "They are rigid," she reported to Admiral Perry and Jake Morrison. "Their society is based entirely on hierarchy and obedience. Lower ranks never question higher ranks, and no one ever questions the High Commander." "That sounds like a strength," Admiral Perry observed. Amy shook her head. "It is a weakness disguised as a strength," she argued. "They have been conquering species for 3,000 years, using the same tactics, because those tactics have always worked. They have never faced an enemy that fights differently, that uses deception and misdirection and unconventional strategies. They do not know how to adapt, because they have never needed to." Jake leaned forward with interest. "What else have you learned?" Amy pulled up a holographic display showing the structure of the Vorath fleet. Their entire military depends on the command ship, which they call the Throne of Conquest, she explained. All orders flow from the High Commander through that ship to the rest of the fleet. Without it, they have no way to coordinate, no way to give commands. "Are you saying that if we take out the command ship, their whole fleet falls apart?" Admiral Perry asked, sounding skeptical. "Not falls apart exactly," Amy replied, "but they would be confused, disorganized, unable to respond effectively. Their training does not include independent decision-making. They are taught to follow orders, not to think for themselves." Jake looked at the holographic display, at the massive command ship sitting at the center of the Vorath formation. "Then that is our target," he said quietly. The days passed too quickly, and the preparations never felt like enough. Lisa Grant finished her work on the modified energy cores and shipped them to Danny Vega's squadron of smugglers. Each core was packed into a small vessel, designed to be carried into the heart of the Vorath fleet and detonated. The volunteers who would fly those missions knew they might not come back, but they stepped forward anyway. Jake Morrison assembled his own team for the strike on the command ship. He needed 50 people willing to attempt the impossible, and he found them among the best and bravest humanity had to offer. Amy Cruz insisted on joining, arguing that she was the only one who could navigate Vorath's systems and communications. Carter, a young officer who had served with Jake for 3 years, volunteered without hesitation. Private Maria Santos, a Marine who had grown up in the slums of New Angeles and fought her way into the military, signed up with a fierce determination in her eyes. On the 29th day, a Vorath ambassador arrived to accept humanity's surrender. The creature was terrifying to look at, standing 8 feet tall, with a body that combined the worst features of a praying mantis and a spider. Its eyes were cold and empty. Its voice a series of clicks that the translation device around its neck converted to human speech. "Your time is nearly over," the ambassador announced to the assembled human council. "The Dominion has given you a gift of days to accept the inevitable. You should be grateful." Admiral Perry stood to face the alien, and his voice did not waver. "We reject your terms," he declared. "Humanity will not surrender. Humanity will not bow. Humanity will fight." The ambassador made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "Then humanity will die," it replied. "You have no idea what you face. We have conquered 100 worlds and destroyed twice that many. Your species will be forgotten, a footnote in the history of the Dominion." Jake Morrison stepped forward, standing beside his admiral. "Maybe," he said calmly, "but we are going to make sure you remember this fight for a very long time." The ambassador turned those cold eyes on Jake and studied him for a long moment. "You have courage," it admitted. It will not save you." Then it turned and left, returning to its ship to rejoin the fleet that was already approaching human space. The council members looked at each other with fear in their eyes, but also with something else. Something that burned brighter than fear. Humanity had made its choice. Now they would see it through to the end. Whatever that end might be. The Vorath fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, and the sight of it made even the bravest hearts falter. 10,000 warships hung in the darkness of space, their hulls black as night and bristling with weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Each ship was larger than anything humanity had built, designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to destroy. On the bridge of the flagship Unity, Admiral Sam Perry watched the enemy fleet through the main view screen and felt the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on his shoulders. His own fleet numbered 273 vessels, everything humanity could gather from 17 star systems. They were outnumbered nearly 40-1, and every person in that fleet knew it. "All ships report ready, Admiral," his communications officer announced. Perry nodded slowly and opened a channel to every ship in his command. "This is Admiral Perry," said, his voice calm and steady despite everything. "Today we face an enemy that believes we are weak, that believes we will fall before them, like so many others have fallen. They expect us to break, to run, to beg for mercy. But they do not know us. They do not know what we are capable of when everything we love is threatened. Fight hard, fight smart, and make them pay for every inch of space they take. God be with you all." The Vorath fleet began to move, advancing toward Jupiter's orbit where the human fleet waited. They moved in perfect formation, thousands of ships acting as one, a demonstration of the power and discipline that had crushed 100 civilizations before this one. On the throne of conquest, the massive command ship at the center of the formation, High Commander Vethrak observed the approaching battle with cold satisfaction. He had led the Dominion's fleets for 60 years and had never known defeat. Humans were just another species to be conquered, another footnote in the long history of Vorath supremacy. "Signal all ships to engage," he ordered, his clicking voice echoing through the command center. "Destroy them quickly. I want this finished before the next cycle begins." The two fleets met in a storm of fire and light that lit up the darkness between worlds. Vorath energy weapons cut through human shields like they were made of paper, and the first wave of human ships exploded into clouds of debris and death. The Unity shook as it took hit after hit, its shields failing faster than the engineers could repair them. A destroyer called the Relentless vanished in a flash of light, taking 300 crew members with it. Admiral Perry gripped his command chair and watched ship after ship disappear from his tactical display. "Hold the line," he commanded, even as another cruiser broke apart under Vorath fire. The human fleet was dying, but it was dying slowly, and that was exactly what Perry needed. While the main battle raged, a different kind of fight was beginning on the edges of the Vorath formation. Danny Vega led his squadron of converted smuggler ships through the chaos of battle, weaving between explosions and debris with the skill that had made him a legend. His ship, a battered freighter called the Lucky Shot, carried one of Dr. Grant's modified energy cores in its cargo hold. "Stay tight, everyone," Danny called over the squadron frequency. "We need to get to those big ships in the back before they notice us." Beside him flew 17 other ships, each one piloted by someone who had volunteered for what everyone knew was probably a one-way mission. They were pirates and smugglers and outcasts, people who had spent their lives on the wrong side of the law. But today, they were something else. Today, they were heroes. Interceptors spotted them and opened fire, its weapons tearing through the shields of one of Danny's wingmen. The ship spun out of control and crashed into an asteroid, killing everyone aboard. Keep moving, Danny ordered, his voice hard. We mourn later, right now we fight. The squadron pushed deeper into the Vorath formation, dodging fire and using the larger enemy ships as cover. They were too small and too fast for the Vorath gunners to track easily, and the chaos of the main battle was drawing most of the attention. On the throne of conquest, Commander Keth Vor, the High Commander's second-in-command, noticed something strange on his tactical display. "My lord," he said, approaching the throne where Vethrak sat watching the battle. "Small human vessels are penetrating our formation. They appear to be heading for our capital ships." Vethrak made a dismissive clicking sound. "Destroy them," he ordered. "They are gnats, trying to bite giants." Keth Vor bowed and transmitted the order, but the small human ships were already too deep in the formation. Defensive fire reached for them, but they danced through it with movements that seemed almost random, impossible to predict. Danny Vega's console lit up with warning lights as his ship took a glancing hit that knocked out his starboard engine. "Lucky shot is damaged," he reported to his squadron. "I am losing power, and my engines are failing." "Pull back," one of his wingmen urged. "We can cover your retreat." Danny laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Pull back to where?" he asked. "No, I am going to finish what I started." He aimed his crippled ship at the nearest Vorath carrier, a massive vessel that was launching fighters to join the battle. The carrier was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Danny's freighter was barely 50 meters, a speck against a mountain. "This is for my sister," Danny whispered as he pushed his remaining engine to maximum thrust. "This is for her kids. This is for Kepler 442b. The Vorath carrier tried to turn, tried to bring its weapons to bear on the tiny ship racing toward it, but Danny was too close and moving too fast. At the last possible moment, he ejected the modified energy core directly into the carrier's main hangar bay. Then the lucky shot slammed into the carrier's hull, and Danny Vega died. A heartbeat later, the energy core detonated. The explosion was beyond anything the Vorath had ever seen. The carrier's own power systems, disrupted by Dr. Grant's modification, added their energy to the blast, and the ship simply ceased to exist. The shockwave expanded outward, catching 3 nearby destroyers and tearing them apart. Across the battlefield, other smuggler ships reached their targets and did the same. One by one, they flew into the hearts of Vorath capital ships and unleashed the fury of corrupted energy cores. 7 major warships were destroyed in less than 3 minutes, and the Vorath formation shuddered like a wounded animal. On the throne of conquest, High Commander Vethrak rose from his throne with rage burning in his cold eyes. "What is happening?" he demanded. "How are they doing this?" Keth Vor was studying the tactical display with growing alarm. "They have found a way to overload our energy cores," he reported. "These small ships are carrying weapons specifically designed to destroy our vessels." Vethrak hissed with fury. "Impossible," he snarled. "No species has ever understood our technology well enough to turn it against us." But the evidence was undeniable. The Vorath fleet was taking losses it had never anticipated. And for the first time in 3,000 years, the perfect formation was breaking. Admiral Perry saw the chaos spreading through the enemy ranks and felt something he had not expected to feel this day: hope. "All ships press the attack," he ordered. "They are confused. Hit them now while we have the chance." The battered human fleet surged forward, throwing everything they had at the disorganized Vorath. Ships that had been fighting defensively now charged into the enemy formation, their weapons blazing. The Vorath began to recover, their superior numbers and firepower still overwhelming, but the damage was done. They had been hurt, truly hurt, for the first time anyone could remember. On a small frigate called the Last Chance, hiding in the shadow of a destroyed Vorath cruiser, Commander Jake Morrison watched the battle unfold, and knew it was time. "That is our opening," he said to his crew. "Amy, is the signal ready?" Lieutenant Amy Cruz nodded from her station, her fingers dancing over the controls. Confirmed. Once we broadcast it, every Vorath sensor will identify us as a Dominion medical transport. Jake turned to look at the 50 men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing most of them would not survive what came next. This is it, he told them. We are going straight into the heart of the enemy fleet to kill their high commander. Anyone who wants to leave can do so now. No one will think less of you. No one moved. Jake smiled, and this time there was real warmth in it. Then let us make history, he said. Helm, take us in. The Last Chance slipped out of its hiding spot and began its journey toward the throne of conquest, toward the most heavily defended ship in the most powerful fleet the galaxy had ever known. Behind them, the battle for humanity's survival continued to rage, and the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath. The Last Chance moved through the Vorath fleet like a ghost, ignored by the massive warships that should have destroyed it 100 times over. Amy Cruz's false identification signal worked perfectly, convincing every Vorath sensor that the small human frigate was actually a Dominion medical transport. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge and watched enemy ships pass within weapons range, their guns silent, their crews unaware that death was slipping past them. Steady, he murmured to his helm officer, a steady young woman named Rachel Kim. Do not give them any reason to look twice at us. Rachel nodded, without taking her eyes off her controls, guiding the ship through the maze of enemy vessels with careful precision. Around them, the battle continued to rage, explosions lighting up the darkness as human and Vorath ships tore each other apart. Each flash of light meant someone dying, either human or alien, and Jake forced himself not to think about how many of his people were giving their lives to give him this chance. The throne of conquest grew larger on the view screen, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. The command ship was enormous, nearly 20 kilometers long and bristling with enough weapons to destroy a planet. Its hull was covered in strange symbols that glowed with inner light, and defensive platforms orbited around it, like moons around a dark world. There is our target, Jake said quietly. Amy, can you find us a way in? Amy studied her console, her fingers flying over the controls as she analyzed the data she had gathered from intercepted Vorath communications. There is an auxiliary docking port on the lower section, she reported. It is used for supply deliveries and is less heavily guarded than the main bays. Medical transports would use that port, Ben Carter observed from his station. That is perfect for our cover. Gave the order. The Last Chance descended toward the massive command ship, and as they approached, a Vorath voice crackled over their communication system. Identify yourself and state your purpose, the voice demanded in its clicking language, translated by the ship's computers. Amy took over, broadcasting a response in perfectly replicated Vorath speech patterns. This is Medical Transport Vessel 9-7. We carry supplies and personnel requested by the High Commander's personal physician. There was a long pause, and everyone on the bridge held their breath. If the Vorath checked their records, if they asked for verification codes that Amy could not provide, the mission would end right here in a flash of energy weapons. But the voice came back with simple instructions. Proceed to docking port 12. Prepare for inspection upon arrival. Jake allowed himself a small smile. Nice work, Amy. Do not thank me yet, she replied. We still have to get through the inspection. The Last Chance docked with the Throne of Conquest, and the airlock cycled open to reveal a team of Vorath soldiers waiting to inspect the supposed medical transport. Jake and his team were ready. They had dressed in captured Vorath armor, modified to fit human bodies, and they carried Vorath weapons alongside their own. It was not a perfect disguise, but in the dim lighting of the docking bay, it might be enough. Lieutenant Ben Carter led the first team through the airlock, his heart pounding, but his face calm. The Vorath inspection team approached, their insect-like eyes studying the newcomers with cold suspicion. "Your documentation," the lead inspector demanded, extending one of its forearms. Ben handed over a datapad that Amy had prepared, filled with forged supply manifests and transfer orders. The inspector studied it for a long moment, then looked up at Ben with those terrible eyes. "Said, you are not Vorath," it said slowly, recognition dawning. Ben did not hesitate. His plasma pistol was in his hand and firing before the inspector could raise an alarm. The docking bay exploded into violence as Jake's team poured through the airlock, their weapons cutting down the Vorath soldiers before they could organize a defense. The aliens were tough and fast, their natural armor deflecting glancing shots, but the humans had the advantage of surprise and the desperate courage of people with nothing to lose. Private Maria Santos took down 3 Vorath soldiers with precise shots to their vulnerable throat joints, moving through the chaos like she had been born for this moment. "Dock secured," Jake reported over his communicator. "All teams, move out." The 50 humans split into 3 groups and began moving through the corridors of the Throne of Conquest. Amy had studied the ship's layout from intercepted data. She guided them through passages that twisted and turned in ways that made no sense to human minds. The Vorath had built their ship according to their own biology and psychology, and navigating it felt like walking through a nightmare. They encountered resistance almost immediately. Vorath soldiers poured out of side corridors, their weapons filling the air with deadly energy bolts. Humans fell, their bodies torn apart by alien firepower, but the survivors kept moving, kept fighting, driven by the knowledge that failure meant the death of everyone they loved. Ben Carter took a plasma bolt to his shoulder, the energy burning through his armor and searing his flesh. He stumbled and nearly fell, but Maria Santos was there, grabbing him and pulling him along while laying down covering fire with her other hand. "I can still fight," Ben gasped through the pain. "Good," Maria replied shortly, "because we are not done yet." Front, his weapon blazing as he cut a path through the enemy. He had been a soldier for 20 years and had fought in more battles than he could count, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Vorath were relentless, fearless, throwing themselves at the human intruders without regard for their own lives. But humans could be relentless too. They pushed deeper into the ship, losing people with every corridor, but never stopping, never turning back. By the time they reached the outer doors of the command center, only 18 of the original 50 were still standing. Jake looked at his surviving team, their faces bloody and their bodies battered, and felt a fierce pride burning in his chest. "The High Commander is on the other side of these doors," he said. "With him are his personal guards, the best warriors the Vorath have. We are outnumbered and outgunned, and we have no chance of surviving this." He paused and smiled that cold smile that his crew had come to know. "But we are going to kill him anyway, because that is what humans do. We do the impossible, and we call it a regular Tuesday." Ben Carter laughed, despite the agony in his shoulder. "Tuesday sounds good to me." Maria Santos checked her weapon and nodded grimly. "Let us finish this." Amy Cruz stepped forward and placed her hand on the door control. "Once I open this, there is no going back," she warned. Jake Morrison took a deep breath and raised his weapon. "Do it." The doors slid open to reveal the command center of the Throne of Conquest, a vast chamber filled with glowing displays and alien technology. At its center, on a throne made of dark metal and what looked disturbingly like bones, sat High Commander Vethrak. Around him stood 50 of his personal guards, warriors in ornate armor, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained power. The High Commander rose from his throne, his tall form towering over everyone in the room. "Humans," he said, and there was something like surprise in his clicking voice. "You have come far, further than any prey has ever reached, but your journey ends here." Jake did not waste time with words. "Attack," he ordered, and 18 humans charged into 50 Vorath warriors. The battle that followed would become legend, told and retold across the galaxy for centuries to come. Humans fought with a ferocity that shocked even the Vorath, who had thought they knew everything about war. They used every trick, every dirty tactic, every desperate maneuver that humanity had learned in its long, bloody history of fighting things bigger and stronger than itself. Maria Santos killed 6 Vorath guards before one of them finally brought her down, and even then, she used her last breath to throw a grenade that took 3 more with her. Ben Carter fought with one arm hanging useless at his side. His shots precise and deadly, until a Vorath blade finally ended him. One by one the humans fell, but they took Vorath with them, and slowly, impossibly, they cut a path toward the throne. When it was over, when the last Vorath guard collapsed with human blood on his claws, only 3 humans remained standing. Jake Morrison, wounded in a dozen places but still alive. Amy Cruz, her translator device destroyed but her spirit unbroken. And a young private named Chris Taylor, barely old enough to shave, who had somehow survived where veterans had fallen. They faced the High Commander across a floor slick with blood from both species. Vethrak stood alone now, his guards dead around him, but he showed no fear. "Impressive," he admitted, drawing a blade that seemed to drink the light. "You have earned the right to die by my hand." Jake raised his weapon, but it clicked empty, its power cell exhausted. His combat knife, a simple blade of human steel. "I have earned the right to kill you," he corrected. Then he attacked, and the final battle of the command center began. Jake Morrison fought the High Commander of the Vorath Dominion with nothing but a combat knife and the stubborn refusal to die that defined his species. Vethrak was faster, stronger, and had been training for war longer than humanity had been traveling between stars. His blade moved like liquid darkness, cutting through the air with deadly precision. Jake ducked, dodged, and rolled, using every trick he had learned in 20 years of combat to stay alive. Blood ran from a dozen wounds on his body, but he kept moving, kept fighting, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing everyone he had ever loved. Amy Cruz circled around the battle, looking for an opening, while young Chris Taylor tried to find a weapon that still had power. The command center was filled with Vorath technology, consoles and displays that flickered with alien light. Amy's eyes found what she was looking for, the main communication hub that controlled all signals from the Throne of Conquest. If she could reach it, if she could broadcast what was happening here, it might change everything. Vethrak's blade sliced across Jake's arm, cutting deep and sending his knife flying from suddenly nerveless fingers. The High Commander loomed over him, his insect-like face showing what might have been satisfaction. "You fought well," Vethrak admitted, "better than any prey I have ever faced. But in the end, you are just another species that learned too late that resistance is futile." Jake fell to his knees, his strength finally failing him. He looked up at the alien that was about to kill him and felt no fear, only regret that he had not been able to do more. "You are wrong," he said through bloody lips. "We have never learned that lesson. We never will." Vethrak raised his blade for the killing blow, and then Chris Taylor shot him in the back. The young private had found a Vorath weapon among the fallen guards, a rifle that still had power, and he had used it without hesitation. The High Commander staggered forward, shock breaking through his cold composure. He turned to face this new threat, but Jake was already moving. Ignoring the agony in his wounded arm, he grabbed a fallen Vorath blade and drove it upward into the High Commander's chest. Vethrak looked down at the human weapon buried in his body, then back at Jake Morrison's determined face. "How?" he whispered, his voice clicking weakly. Jake twisted the blade. "Because we are human," he answered, "and we never give up." The High Commander of the Vorath Dominion fell, and his body hit the floor of his own command center with a sound that echoed through history. Amy Cruz reached the communication hub and activated the broadcast systems. Her hands flew over the alien controls, translating her message into every Vorath frequency. "Vessels," she announced, her voice carrying across the entire fleet. "The High Commander is dead," she said. "The throne of conquest has fallen. Your invasion has failed." On every ship in the Vorath Armada, her words hit like physical blows. The Vorath had built their entire society on hierarchy and obedience, with the High Commander at the absolute top. Without him, without the throne of conquest to issue orders, the chain of command simply collapsed. Captains looked at each other in confusion, waiting for orders that would never come. Some tried to claim authority for themselves, but others refused to recognize them. Arguments erupted, then fighting, as the rigid structure of Vorath society crumbled into chaos. Admiral Perry watched the enemy fleet begin to fall apart, and could hardly believe what he was seeing. Ships were breaking formation, some fleeing toward deep space, while others turned their weapons on each other. Perfect killing machine that had destroyed 100 civilizations was tearing itself to pieces. "All ships," Perry ordered, his voice shaking with emotion. "Press the attack. Drive them out of our system." The battered human fleet surged forward one final time. They were exhausted and outnumbered, and had lost so many friends this day. But victory was within reach, and they could feel it. Vorath ships that had been invincible now fled before them, their crews unable to decide whether to fight or run. By the time the battle ended, over 4,000 Vorath vessels had been destroyed, captured, or scattered to the distant stars. The rest of the invasion fleet had fled back toward Dominion space, carrying word of an impossible defeat. Humanity had lost 200 ships and nearly 50,000 lives, but they had won. On the throne of conquest, Jake Morrison sat on the floor beside the body of the alien he had killed. "Move!" Amy Cruz worked the communication systems, coordinating with the human fleet and directing rescue operations. Chris Taylor stood guard at the door, still holding the weapon that had saved Jake's life. Help arrived within the hour, human Marines flooding into the captured command ship with weapons ready. They found 3 survivors among the 18 who had entered the command center, and the bodies of enemies that outnumbered them 3-1. The rescue team's commander, a grizzled veteran named Pete Collins, looked around the blood-soaked chamber with something like awe on his face. "Commander Morrison," he said, helping Jake to his feet, "you crazy son of a gun, you actually did it." Jake leaned on the younger man and managed a weak smile. "We did it," he corrected. "All of us. Everyone who fought today." News of the victory spread across human space faster than light, carried by ships and signals and the sheer force of human joy. People who had been preparing to die or to spend their lives as slaves, instead celebrated in the streets. Children who had grown up in fear learned that fear could be conquered. The other alien species humanity had encountered watched in stunned silence. The Vorath had been the terror of the galaxy for millennia, an empire that seemed as unstoppable as death itself. Now a species that had only left its homeworld 3 centuries ago had broken them in a single day. The Fenari, who had refused to even speak about the Vorath, sent messages of congratulation and offers of alliance. The crystalline beings of Proxima sent gifts of rare minerals and their equivalent of applause. Even species that had been conquered by the Vorath began to reach out, asking how humanity had done what everyone believed to be impossible. In the weeks that followed, rebellions erupted across Vorath space. Rose up, inspired by humanity's example. The Dominion, which had seemed eternal and invincible, began to crumble from within. Within 5 years, it would be gone entirely, broken into fragments that fought each other instead of conquering others. Jake Morrison spent 2 months in a hospital recovering from his wounds. When he finally emerged, he found a galaxy that looked at humanity with new eyes. A reporter caught him outside the hospital, a young woman with bright eyes and a million questions. "Commander Morrison," she called out, "the galaxy wants to know, what made the difference? How did humanity win when everyone said it was impossible?" Jake thought about his answer for a long moment. He thought about Danny Vega, who had flown his damaged ship into an enemy carrier and died with his sister's name on his lips. He thought about Ben Carter, who had taken a wound for his commander and kept fighting until the very end. He thought about Maria Santos, who had used her last breath to kill one more enemy. He thought about all the humans who had refused to accept that they could not win, who had fought and died and sacrificed everything because surrender was simply not in their nature. "We are a stubborn species," he said finally. "We have been fighting things bigger than us since we climbed down from the trees. We fought the weather and the animals and disease. We fought each other when we could not find anything else to fight. We fought our own limitations and expanded beyond our world. The Vorath expected us to know we were beaten. They expected us to calculate the odds and conclude that resistance was pointless. But humans never learned how to stay beaten. We do not know how to give up. And when you face an enemy that will never stop fighting, no matter the odds, no matter the cost, eventually you have to wonder, you are the one who is going to lose." The reporter wrote down every word, and within days, the quote had spread across the galaxy. It became humanity's promise and humanity's warning, a declaration of who they were and what they would always be. On the site where the battle had been fought, near Jupiter's orbit, humanity built a memorial. It was a simple thing, a pillar of white stone floating in the darkness, inscribed with the names of everyone who had died. At its base, carved in 100 languages so that every species could read it, was a message. We came in peace, we were shown no peace, so we brought war, and we won. Ships from across the galaxy came to see it, to read those words and understand what they meant. The memorial became a symbol, not just of human victory, but of the possibility that the small could defeat the great, that the weak could overcome the strong, that courage and determination can triumph over all the advantages of size and power. Years later, when other species faced their own impossible battles, they would remember humanity's example. They would look at the odds against them, and instead of despair, they would ask themselves one simple question: what would the humans do? And the answer always was to fight, to never give up, never surrender, never accept that defeat was inevitable. Because on one impossible day, a species that had barely begun to explore the stars had faced the mightiest empire in the galaxy and refused to die. That was the day humanity became something more than just another species reaching for the cosmos. That was the day humanity became legend. And legends, as the galaxy would learn, never truly end. They just inspire new ones to begin.